Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast.
Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name is Nick Ingval with my guys Todd Yates and Rohit Malhotra to talk about some Formula One, some testing, some final liveries unveiled, and we gotta shout out our correspondent Aaron Nojima for hooking us up with some intel that we didn't have prior to our last recording, which, if you listened, was a kind of spur of the moment recording. But before we get into that, how you guys doing?
I'm looking forward to having Todd explain this testing results thing to me, because I never thought I'd be the one to get in the nitty and gritty of statistics when it came to Formula One. I was perfectly happy just admiring the personalities, but lo and behold, Todd's got me looking at spreadsheets, so I'm doing all right. Todd, how are you?
I'm just happy that you believe the BS that comes out of my mouth.
Somebody has to.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm fantastic. Excited to talk F1, and we're only like 3 weeks away.
Yeah, it's getting close. Getting close. 18 days as of today. So we talked a good deal about Nikita Mazepin last episode. And although I don't think we need to make too many adjustments to our, let's say,
our takes.
Yeah, our loving embrace of the soon to be former Haas driver. But we did kind of jump the gun, because the news that came out early that day, was that Mazepin is basically saying that, there should be a separation between sports and politics. And that seems to be misrepresented as to like how it was spoken. I don't know exactly how it was said, but Aaron shot me a text and said that the quote journalist deleted her tweet and retracted the statement. But the reason why it ended up blowing up is because Jeremy Clarkson, kind of went all in on trashing Mazepin as soon as the other journalist posted it. So, it's all kind of a pending situation with Haas and whatever that's going to look like. I tend to think that your Alkali is going to be gone for good. I tend to think that Mazepin is going to be gone for good. And, just is what it is.
It is what it is. I understood that the comment went viral. I also don't condone Jeremy Clarkson's language that he utilized to let the world know that Nikita Mazepin is not a very smart individual. But yeah, it's a question of when and not if. And I don't think any of us are going to be that surprised when we get that eventual press release. Now, I think we all will be happy that I think Pietro Fittipaldi is going to hopefully replace Nikita Mazepin in the upcoming season. So that'll be a small win for all things that are decent. But yeah, still kind of stand by the ugliness that this has kind of caused by the allegiances of the Mazepin family, so to speak. So
I, for the record, still do not like Marzipan, as Rohit lovingly calls him. But it is great correction. Like, if it was taken out of context and obviously got shine because of Clarkson's text, I like that you referred to him as a journalist, though, or inferred him as a journalist there. But one fun thing I learned after like a year in them being a sponsor of Haas, it's not your Alkali, it's Ural Kali. Who would have thought?
Really?
Ooh,
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so I was listening to obviously a bunch of other news podcasts, etc. this week, and every single quote-unquote journalist referred to them as Ural Kali, or Ural Kali, or something like that.
Right.
So, I mean, that sounds pretty Russian, but I'm still going to probably call them Uralkali until they no longer exist in F1, because it's way easier to say. And, us Americans aren't very smart when it comes to pronouncing other things.
True.
I stand by my hosts. But I think in a slightly lighter note, we had a couple of liveries that were released this week. So let's go ahead and just complete the set, walk us through the last two liveries, and then what will probably be the final power ranking of our favorite liveries for the third straight week. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Who wants to go first? Because I was looking at the Alfa Romeo one, and my goodness, we know we kind of went hard in the Digi Camo lane, but this is truly a chef's kiss of livery. The only other thing I could say to kind of be a little bit disparaging is the back of the wing has Alfa Romeo in what I can only describe as the Babel cheese font. But I really have a very hard time trying to pick anything in terms of a knit with regards to this color blocking and this colorway.
Now I'm looking up the Alpha car because I did not notice the font on the wing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's beautiful. I think it's probably my favorite car at this point. Yep. Honestly, the wheels are really what send it over the top for me. Like, having the livery incorporated into the wheels is something you don't see in Formula One very often. You know, like even last year when AlphaTauri ran white wheels, I was like, are they really going to run white wheels during the actual races when the car first came out? So,
yeah, I'm surprised more teams don't do different color blocking, taking into account the wheels. And granted, I know Pirelli probably has to drive a hard bargain, and the only type of coloring that we see on the wheels to denote its softness or its hardness. But yeah, I was very impressed by the white wheels, and I thought maybe that would be a gateway into more teams getting creative with how they choose to express the colors of their car.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's a really, really good looking car. I do see the font on the rear wing, which I think is the same font as on the side of the car. That's their old school.
It is. I'm just being silly because of the red, white, and green. Which that, for whatever reason, just reminds me of Babel cheese.
Gotcha. Now I get it. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm not too bright. But I think you just mentioned color blocking. I think that's the only nitpick with this car. I'm not super fond of like the sideways slash of white versus red. I think they could have done something a little bit more interesting there. But man, the gills, the old school font with the clover on top of it, and yeah, man, those. I think that's really what takes it over the top is those painted wheel covers having some sort of a design on them. Like we've seen other cars so far this year that have like a highlight color or something like that. But man, that design is real good. Not as good as the Ferrari still. I still think that takes the cake, but
I was going to get your take on this, Todd. How do you feel since you're also the numbers are when it comes to number placement on the livery? Because we're getting that warped effect, at least in the photos that we've seen. Thank you to WTF1.
Yeah.
That 77 looks a little weird. And now that you had mentioned it from the previous episode, it's the first thing I gravitate towards in terms of, okay, how are the numbers displayed properly on this car?
See, I didn't see that. I did obviously take a peek at the numbers. Because it bothers me on a lot of the other cars, but I think both the 77 and the 24 look decent. I'm looking at like a rear three-quarter shot, though. Maybe I need a side-on type of view. Yeah, I guess I can see how you get a little bit of distortion on the Coke bottle area, but yes. I still think it's not as bad as others.
Yep, for sure. Nick, any thoughts on the Alfa Romeo?
So the one sponsor I don't know is Flocky. And is that really a crypto coin based on Elon Musk? Inspired by Elon Musk?
I thought Dogecoin was his.
Well, yeah, but it is actually. So this is another crypto that is that is inspired. It's actually inspired by Elon Musk's. Let's see what they say. A new crypto coin birthed by fans and members of the Shiba community, Flocky is inspired by Doge father Elon Musk's very own Shiba. So
it's a crypto coin named after his dog.
Yeah.
Man, cool. Back in my day, people would just make Instagram accounts about famous people's dogs, but now we're taking it to the next level. coming up with cryptocurrency. So more power to you people that are continually doing the damn thing with unlimited resources and even more unlimited time.
I wouldn't call unlimited resources. Never mind. We don't need to get into why cryptocurrency is bad.
I was going to ask. The Singa is like a Thai beer, right? So like, yes. I can't think of any other alcohol sponsors on cars this year.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Nick, because I was recently reading up on it because call it, I guess, the Jefferson City, Missouri public high school administration searing this rule into my head. But we were never allowed to wear anything that promoted alcohol or cigarettes, which makes sense. And as I was kind of just doing some digging, I know that all cigarette and tobacco products are now banned from having any sort of advertisement in Formula One. And it was kind of crazy to me because as I did a little bit of digging on Mission Win Now, I didn't realize that they were a child company of Philip Morris, but I still can't figure out what exactly they do other than they seem to be a think tank of some sorts, but I don't know what they're thinking for or thinking against. But that's a good point. I don't think we see as much alcohol sponsorship as we do, let's say, comparing it to NASCAR, which it seems like every car has at least some sort of light in it.
Yeah, and I think Todd mentioned, what is it? Velo is the one that's another.
Velo. There's a couple
there's a
still, right?
Of them, yeah.
Like Velo and God, I just had it and I forgot it. There's another like e-cigarette brand that sponsors one of the cars.
I'll look it up while you guys keep talking.
I was just surprised to see that on there because it's the first one I just recognized. You know, I don't really know all the e-cigarettes and all the the parent company of parent companies that all the tobacco brands, do to play in F1. But that was like one that was like, wow, that's actually just a beer. Like, can't remember if that's on any other car.
I can't off the top of my head, but it has been dwindling for sure because we used to have, well, I mean, this is way, way back when, but we had like a Budweiser car, a Budweiser F1 car, I think in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah. I mean, Johnny Walker
for sure.
Yeah.
No, that was one of the other weird legacies, if you will, of me watching Senna, was just noticing how many random sponsors, and I truly use the word random because I think one of the other cars on the day that Ayrton Senna unfortunately had his crash was sponsored by MTV, and I think that might have been the other car that I don't remember the driver who passed, but he also had died on the track that day. And the thing that was just kind of a weird thing to me is like, MTV used to sponsor a Formula One car? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
There's a video out there that's really interesting on some crazy sponsorships, but at one point there was a diamond company sponsoring a car, and it was I think only for one race in Monaco, and they put like a 30 carat diamond in the nose of the F1 cars as like a spectacle or whatever, and then one of them crashed and the diamond disappeared. I need to look into that story more, but it was like a several $100,000 diamond that just vanished.
Amazing.
On the streets of Monaco. Or accidentally vanished.
Yeah.
Does the brand Vuse, VUSC?
That's it.
Yes.
That's the one. But yeah, those are all owned by some big tobacco brand, I'm sure. So they're getting around. They're somehow funneling money into F1. And I don't know if Mission Winnow or Mission Win Now, however you say it, is still a part of the Ferrari team, but it wouldn't surprise me if they have rebranded and are some other form of sponsorship there. But the new way to launder money into F1 is Bitcoin, which is what the rest of the world's doing because everybody has. Not only did Red Bull get the $100 million a year sponsorship from Oracle as their now title sponsor, they also signed like another $100 million deal or something for that Bitly something. It's on their front wing and it's very ugly. Wow. But it's cryptocurrency. Pretty much every team has a crypto sponsor this year.
Yeah, it's called Bybit. I just looked it up.
Bybit.
Yep.
There you go.
They signed a $150 million sponsorship deal with Red Bull. It's worth $50 million per annum, or $150 over the course of the 3 years. I'm surprised. I guess $100 million gets you title sponsorship, and $300 million gets you into the league, so to speak. So there we go.
Yeah. So how about this other non-sponsored but lovingly called what was the bang? What was the type
Rainbow
of bang?
Unicorn.
The Rainbow Unicorn.
The Rainbow
bang.
Unicorn, or Bankstaberry.
Yeah.
I know.
Bang.
It was really.
Sorry.
No, I was the one, unfortunately, that made the comparison in jest, and look at that. The egg was on my face, because when we saw both instances of the Alpine livery that were debuted last weekend, they both represented different flavors. Rainbow Unicorn was the one that I still remember. I couldn't figure out what the pink and blue one that we attributed it to. I want to say
Cotton
something
candy
like
or something?
Rainbow Skedaddle.
Oh,
yes.
Rainbow Skedaddle.
Yeah, Skedaddle, yeah.
Yeah, so still don't know what Bang Energy does, but more powers to them, because they did what Rich Energy couldn't do, which is impact Formula One in the positive. In this case, inspiring 2 liveries by Alpine. My question to both of you is, which livery do you like more? The one that will be run for the first 2 races of the season, which is apparently an homage to Racing Point, or the more blue and pink BWT inspired livery that we all expected?
Easily the pink one, right? Like, I don't think that's a question. It's just, regardless of color, the cohesiveness of the theme is better overall than the weird, like, blue car with the bulging pink side pods that look like that gives you the essence of that Bang Energy can. I mean, am I alone in that? I think the pink one is hands down better.
No, I'm with you. I think the pink one is significantly better.
Yeah, I know. It's really interesting, because as much as I think it is equal parts cotton candy and South Beach Miami LeBron flavors, the pink works for me. I think really, if Alpine is being honest with themselves, they should purposely just switch out and be like, oh, sorry guys, the press releases were backwards. The one that's actually going to be there for the first 2 races will be the predominantly blue, while we're going to stick with the Pink Panther logo for the rest of the season.
Yeah. I mean, and just to be clear, Bang Energy is not sponsoring a Formula One car, but we're just saying that because it looks like Bang Energy cans. And I have to say, like, Bang Energy is like the 3rd class energy drink compared to like Red Bull, right? Like Red Bull at least kind of empowers people. Bang Energy is like Instagram models, a lot of Trump backdooring, like a lot of like just things that, if people, I guess it's fitting for Formula One, right? It would be a perfect Formula One sponsor in that regard, because you've got all this like, layers of covering your tracks kind of thing that goes on with the cigarettes.
No, exactly. And I know we kind of joked about it earlier, but crypto seems to be the perfect way to get paid in Formula One, because I like Formula One cars, and my user profile is just full of hot air and it's extremely flashy, but we don't know if it'll be here in another 5 years. So,
I mean, if Bang Energy was a first tier energy drink, they'd have their own team. Yeah, so
true.
I would think they would have some sort of bus that would carry people to and fro, like the Bang, but I'll see myself out.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, they'd be the ones that would what was the, I forget what they used to call like the women that stood on the grid, but like, used to have the girls on the grid.
Oh, like the Umbrella Girls.
Umbrella Girls, yeah, like they would totally be the team that like brought back like the, let's say like, slightly less than classy Umbrella Girls.
The booth babes, if you will, of a previous era.
Yeah,
just wearing,
exactly. I mean, because that's who's their sponsor in everyday life, right? So
I don't think I've ever seen somebody sponsored by Bang, so I'm looking at the wrong threads.
No, as a married man, you're looking at the right threads.
No, as a married man, I'm looking for that. I'm kidding. I love you, babe.
This will be the last episode where all 3 of us will be here, because this will be the one all of our significant others will hear and then promptly kick us out and forbid us from all hanging out again.
Yeah.
No, it's really funny. I guess simple tangent. I don't know if either of you guys do the show How To with John Wilson on HBO. It's a very nice documentary series about this guy living in New York who just has thousands and thousands of hours of B-roll footage. And the new season started up, I want to say, in September or November. And one of the trips eventually leads him to the Bang owner's housing compound. And it's exactly what you think it is all I will say, but it's well worth the 30-minute deep dive to get there.
Oh, I'm definitely checking that out.
All right. Well, let's. I guess I should say, what do you think makes a team decide to unveil two liveries at the beginning of the season, right? Because it's only Alpine and McLaren, right? Nobody else did a
Alpha too, I thought, right? Because the Digicamo is also exclusive to a couple of races.
No, that was strictly a testing
testing
livery that they didn't. It's like when car manufacturers come out with a new car, they put the camo livery on it so you can't see the body lines as well, etc.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just selfishly, I think it's marketing, right? Like, get both sets. Get our pink set, get our blue set. Because as Fernando Alonso is one to tell you, he has 18 different commemorative hats to represent all the different races. So I think that's what it is you try to monetize everything you can. In Formula One, much like a lot of these collectible hobbies, you pride yourself on having every piece of memorabilia to showcase how big of a fan you are. So I simply think it's that, but I'm sure there's more to that than meets the eye.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Alpine or BWT, Alpine, whatever, I think it's strictly down to having BWT as a sponsor. Like, the pink car first happened when they were transitioning from Force India to Racing Point.
Racing Point.
Yeah. And then I think them, that they're very serious about their color, right? Pink is their brand color, pink, blue, white. And maybe in part of the deal from them going from Aston Martin to Alpine was like, we need some serious pink on this car. And they're like, okay, well, we're not going to give you an all pink car because we want to run the whole, blue French Alpine color. We'll give you an all pink car for a couple races, and then we'll just put a lot of pink on the actual car. I mean, that's because I don't see that with any other team that has like a title sponsor. I don't know if like Oracle has like a company color or, colors or branding or colors in their branding, whatever. But
I think it's just a red logo.
They just literally just stamped it across. And I don't even think it's red on the Red Bull. I think it's gray.
Yeah.
Really?
So, so I think it's just BWT being serious about their having that pink.
It's just interesting that only two teams would do that. I feel like we're coming into a new era with all of that anyway, right? Like, it's kind of like the colors in the wheels. I think we're going to start seeing a whole lot more of all this type of stuff. You're going to see special liveries. You're going to see more, like, look, you're opening up to like more and more. To Rohit's point, 30 million new viewers this year. So, that's a lot of merch to be sold, a lot of variations. Because I think that's something that, like, for me, like the sports car teams that I follow, right? They have, when they were in Le Mans and did, art cars for Le Mans, I bought all sorts of stuff specifically for the art cars, right? Like, they had 3 different variations, or a few different variations actually over the years. But like, to me, it's just like, cool. Like, now's the time to buy it if you're going to do it. So it seems like a pretty good play in terms of like that side of the business too.
That's a great point. Like the golf livery from the McLaren in Monaco last year. Like, I was absolute sucker for that just because I love the history of golf liveried cars dating back to Le Mans and all that. But that livery was so good, I bought a hat and a shirt from that collection just because I was like, yeah, I have to have that. And I hope that they have some special livery like that's based on the golf again this year. But that's a really good, interesting question that, like, now that F1 is owned by an American what are they? Venture capitalist group or whatever.
A hedge fund.
Hedge fund. Liberty Media owns F1 now, and
Right.
you're starting to see like the relaxation of a bunch of rules like that, because I don't think you could do special liveries even a few years ago. Like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the drivers weren't allowed to change their helmets. I think, maybe like 5 years ago. So maybe and the social media presence, as we know, in the last 4 or 5 years has ramped up significantly.
Totally.
So
yeah, every team even has taken it next level with the social media, right? Like it was like clearly a Formula One wide initiative to like really get involved on social media compared to what they were doing. But to Rohit's point, right? I mean, Fernando Alonso and his Kamoa brand, his hats, he's done that. Lewis has had, specific hats released at races. I don't know if he did last year, but 2018, 19, like almost every race has a specific, color or theme to the hat that they sell for that race. And I mean, I know that they all know this is a huge, moneymaker. But it's just interesting that, thinking about the cars themselves, I mean, I don't know, like about you guys, but like I have all sorts of model cars and, little die-cast cars and, I just buy them because it's like, a thing. I like to see them and be able to look at them and remember that time. But throwing an extra livery out there or two, if that's the case, just makes it to where like, cool, I'm going to buy 3 of them this year for my favorite teams.
I have a question for you guys, since you are much more entrenched in this before me kind of taking the leap a couple years ago. What is Formula One's perception around some of its rules? Like, is it a golf type environment or attitude where it's a good old boys network and, we have to follow the letter of the law and there can't be any sort of wiggle room? Because as you guys are kind of chatting, the vibe I get is it's very similar to the NBA when David Stern was commissioner, who kind of ruled with this iron fist and, put in things like the dress code. And now Adam Silver's almost undone all of that. So the players can not only wear almost what they want to wear at each game, but now he's even gone a step farther and taken it to the on-the-court performance where your sneakers no longer have to match your on-court apparel. So it seems like that's the approach that Formula One and Liberty Media is now taking. Would that be fair? Or are you guys envisioning still kind of having that good old golf mentality of, okay, certain things can never be changed because it ruins the integrity of the sport?
Well, I think it's well documented. The previous F1 boss, chief, whatever you want to call him, Bernie Eccleston, he's the one that like took F1 in the 70s and blew it up into this like global conglomerate.
Sure.
And it was like, hey, I'm going to make you guys, the teams, a ton of money by doing this, and got the broadcasting rights. And there's documentaries and stuff on how that came about. That documentary one, Life on the Limit, which I shared with you too, which we still have to talk about, talks about that. But Bernie said, when like in the early 2000s, when the internet was coming of age, he said like, that's nonsense. It's like a waste of time. The prime demographic for F1 is like 40 to 60 years old or something, and completely was ignoring the youth. And since Liberty Media has taken over, they've relaxed a bunch of good old boy rules like that. And they've even doubled down, like Nick was saying, on probably making an initiative like, there's money to be made for everybody here. Get a social media channel, put your brand out there, make your drivers lovable if you can. Sorry, Haas. About, having them do silly games or like, guessing games or cook food together or whatever. So, but back to Nick's point earlier, I would love to buy die casts of Formula One cars if they weren't $500.
Yeah,
I know I ranted on this last podcast.
No, rent away.
Everything is so damn expensive. I was looking for the golf. Actually, recently I was looking again for the golf liveried Monaco car from last year, 1/18th scale. So it's probably, 13, 14 inches long. So it's a big die cast, but it's like $500. I'm not buying that. and they didn't make a small one. So what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Nick, it's $1 billion idea. Whoever wants to make moderately priced Formula One memorabilia, take it with you, do with it what you need. But come on, not all of us are balling on that grandiose level. A lot of us are balling on a budget, so make it happen. Nick, you were saying.
I mean, I think racing's just an expensive sport, right? Like you're selling a dream to a lot of people, right? As opposed to, you know, NASCAR, let's say, being very much like, going for the Walmart shopper kind of, fan base. And I think that F1 is slowly embracing, not even slowly, they're embracing like all this change. I mean, crypto is a great example of it, right? Like the fact that you're, crypto is, in my opinion, crypto is probably going to be a huge part of our future, right? We're seeing it even in the Russian invasion in Ukraine. They just opened up their Ethereum and Bitcoin, like put out their public addresses, and people have been sending money to support Ukraine directly to them in a way that you could never do before, right? And those types of things are going to be, they're going to be game changing, right? You don't need a third party bank to control anything. But I think too, like there's a lot of risk in taking on a sponsor from something that's so polarizing still, but also that to your point earlier, not all these people are going to be around, like there's going to be failures, especially because it's a new world, it's a new thing, that's how it works. Even if you go to the early days of .com or the early days of anything, right? People jump in, think they got it figured out, and they fail. But then they come around and they figure it out the second time, right? Like you have to fail to get it right. And I think Formula One embracing that kind of stuff, whether it's crypto, whether it's kind of the new social media, kind of look and feel that all the teams have, to me, all that stuff is trying to appeal to a much younger demographic and get away from that, Bernie Ecclestone era of like, Formula One, because on the other hand, you've got a lot of young people making a lot of money right now compared to, the way it was, I don't know, in the 70s. I doubt there was too many billionaire, 25-year-olds in the 70s, where now you could have a .com or an app or a crypto, or NFTs, and nobody knows who you are, and you could be a billionaire. Like,
right.
That's crazy, compared to what it was then, where it was like you had to be in real estate, you had to be in banking, you had to be in hedge funds, whatever it was in the 70s. Kind of it reminds me of Wolf of Wall Street type of stuff, right? The people that played in that movie were established, been doing this is how we made all of our money. And then he comes in and is like, kind of flips it on its lid, legally or illegally, I guess is debatable, but like, kind of flips it on its lid and figures out a way to make a ton of money, which a lot of other people decided, hey, you can make a ton of money doing this. And I think that's kind of where Formula One is smarter to be in, at least receptive to all these young things, as opposed to, like look at how the Haas sponsorship, with Mazepin is going. We were just talking about Latifi, and look at the negative association that we have with somebody like Lance Stroll. Even though he's deserving of the seat and he's an incredible driver, there's still a negative association because it's old money coming in. And yeah, it's old money that runs all of this, right? It always will be. But from a branding perspective and a marketing perspective, you want the young, hip, cool stuff to be like, how do you get the millionaire TikTokers to show up at Formula One? Because that's going to introduce, that's going to pay for the next 10, 20 years if you get the right people involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have them do a choreographed dance on the grid.
Exactly. We basically saw it at Super Bowl, with all these people dancing on the cars of, like the evolution of Like if you would have told Snoop and Dr. Dre that they were going to have people dancing on their Impalas in the middle of the Super Bowl, you know, you would have just like they would have just laughed at you back in the day because it would have been, you know, it didn't come from that place. But it's always that stuff that always brings new people in. You gotta be thinking outside the box to get that audience and to grow it. I think so.
That's
but,
shameless plug.
Anyway, that was long-winded. Sorry.
That's good. Yeah, I think one other thing I will say, because to your point, we have a certain idea of what a race car fan looks like in America, and that's mostly NASCAR skewed or NASCAR centric. And then to compare and contrast that, because I think, Todd, it was you that said Formula One's expensive. It's expensive to get into if you're a driver. It's even more expensive to get into if you're a fan. And it reminds me a lot of the dynamic of how soccer, global football is viewed. Ironically, it's the inverse because for the longest time, that sport was viewed as a white-collar, orange slices in the morning, mom and PTA meetings that are happening on the sidelines. It's a rich kid sport, but it's the world's game. In a lot of places in this world, all you need is the ball. So I thought that was the interesting dynamic between the two, where you've almost kind of flipped it on its head. And I wonder, are we going to see a similar trajectory with the fandom of Formula One as we have with global football? So,
well, besides needing just a ball in soccer, you need a $100 million race car to participate in some form of
that's
F1.
Fair. That's
so
fair.
maybe
I'm
not.
pretty sure that's in the same.
Unless
Walmart.
they start coming out with, you know, free-to-play go-karts in neighborhoods that are F1 sponsored.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That would be cool. So you guys want to talk testing?
Let's do it, Professor Yates. Talk to us.
Well, I know I want to get your guys' thoughts because I'm over here trying to decipher what we saw or didn't see in testing. Big middle finger to F1 for not televising this this round of testing, which wasn't a test, but they called it a test all weekend. But it was a shakedown, but it wasn't a shakedown.
So I guess my first question is: will Bahrain be camera ready, or is that also going to be behind closed doors, so to speak?
No, yeah, Bahrain's going to be televised, and like I mentioned, shout out to the Discord, Sneaker History Discord. I will be hopefully streaming that on some level in the Discord. So everybody from the Discord join up. Chat. Let's chat about F1.
I will say this. I think the thing that is the most obvious is, hey, Lewis seemingly has picked up where he left off, where he had the fastest time. And big surprise, who was number two? But the prince that was promised, George Russell. I mean, I think that is going to be the most interesting subplot, is how does Mercedes rebound from a second-place finish for the first time in nearly a decade?
Well, they won the Constructors, right? They still won as a team.
But
it's just,
but for fair weather fans like me, that doesn't. What construct who? It's all about the drivers, baby.
It's true. It is true. If the
that is true. This is 8 in a year for them, right?
Yeah, 8 in a row, which is just absolutely insane. And I hope that the results of this test are super wrong, because I don't want to see Mercedes, Red Bull in that order. I want to see Checo go up there and get. I'd like to see George get a winner here or two or there, but like Ferrari looked good minus the porpoising,
the prancing Ferrari. So walk me through that. What exactly happened there?
Okay,
what causes that?
Yeah. I'm going to try to explain this with my minute brain, but so we talked about how these are ground effects cars, which they're bringing back from the 80s, early 90s. So what that means is the airflow, it's essentially like the upside down version of an airplane wing. So the air goes up over the car and creates an area of high pressure. The air going under the car creates an area of low pressure, thereby sucking the car down into the ground. That's how they create the downforce in these new cars. Does that make sense?
Yes,
okay.
Thus far.
So what's happening is the car essentially is getting compressed into the ground so much that there's not enough room for the air to pass through, and the air is stalling at the rear of the car. Stalling meaning that it's disconnecting from the airflow pattern under the car. The air stalls then, thereby the car loses its downforce, so it uncompresses, goes up a little bit, then it catches that air again and compresses again, and it just is like a cyclical pattern, and that's what's causing the bouncing. If that made any sense at all.
It did. So, I mean, I think that's one thing that I've always heard about is you want cars with great downforce. And my assumption what downforce meant was it's obviously the car that's closest to the ground and stays closest to the ground because that unlocks a higher level of speed.
That is not
that even close.
No. So the tires have a certain amount, like a pretty set amount of mechanical grip, right? And that's the rubber rubbing against the rough surface of the track. That's like a limited or finite amount, and it degrades over time. Where an F1 car gets its magic, let's say, is the fact that the air pressing the car down into the ground gives it that much extra grip, which is why they can go around like a big horseshoe bend at 170 miles an hour.
Okay. So it truly is magic.
Yes, it is witchcraft. I barely get it. Nick, you look like you're about to say something.
I mean, I think this is all kind of so early, right? Like this is what these sessions are for, is for people to like work out these kind of things. And there's so much going on in these cars. Obviously not everybody's having the issue, so it's not something that they can't fix in some way, shape, or form. Some cars might have to deal with it more than others, or maybe in more extreme ways than others. But I think just in general, they're like, this is relatively, there's not a lot of opportunity for the teams to test cars like this, right? Like this is like, it's pretty short, the amount of testing that goes in before the season starts. I mean, they're obviously able to do a bunch of stuff, but like, I don't know.
No, that's actually a great point, is because now there's regulation in this cost cap era that we have, and there has been for a long time, that they're not allowed to take the cars out to test. They can't actually take the physical cars out and test. They have to do everything in wind tunnels, or CFD, which is computational flow dynamics, I believe. So like computer generated models of airflow. And that's why that we have this porpoising problem, is that they weren't allowed, or they can't test it on even a full-size car in a wind tunnel, because they can't get the cars that close to the belt that the car is running on, because it would destroy the belt.
Yeah.
So and like I said, they can't take the car out on a real track and test in a real world. They can do a shakedown day prior to testing, one shakedown day that's like to do footage, camera stuff of the car on track, but they're only allowed to go at 70% pace. So they can't even test it like full speed.
And what does that mean, 70% pace? Just the total miles per hour, kilometers per hour? Or is there something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so like they'll have, and they don't do it like, oh, you're only allowed to go, 160 down this straight. They'll have like a time delta. And time delta meaning that if the expected lap around that track that they're testing on is 1 minute, they'll have to do a 70% time, like, a minute 30 or whatever. I'm bad at math. Is on the track.
This does start to remind me of golf a little, in terms of how minute the details are and how everything does have that quantifiable edge that it has to match. And I'm sure there are people on the track that are representing the FIA that are sticking to it with a stopwatch or whatever the equivalent is instead of a stopwatch, because that is something really interesting to me, especially at the point that you called out of there's no way to discover this problem until you put the car to the track.
And I think the porpoising was, if I remember right, like 240 kilometers or 250 kilometers, like, so you wouldn't really even experience it on a shakedown day. Like, you're not going to get up to that speed ever if you're only running 70%. If you're limited to 70%. So it's definitely an interesting, phenomenon, I guess, but like we've seen it before. And I just think that, these guys are the best engineers in the world. There's there's relatively no chance of us seeing that in an actual race.
Right.
You know, maybe a minimal amount, right? But like by 3 races into the season, we won't even be thinking about it.
So this is like in the NBA or the NFL where there's a lot of holding penalties in the preseason, and then when the actual season happens, we don't care because, hey, football's back. I guess I will use that as a segue to ask you guys, does that change your opinion of Ferrari at all? Because I think we've all kind of tabulated them as our unofficial second teams of the year, despite our McLaren fandom in the middle and the right portion of the screen. But I think everybody has a vested interest in Ferrari, and I'm really hoping that, to Nick's point, this is something that we can laugh about midway through the year. Be like, hey, remember when there was porpoising?
Yeah, I think to what Nick said earlier, like, I don't think that we'll see this, maybe a little bit, but I don't think by the time the first race happens in Bahrain, I think they'll have it figured it out. As Nick mentioned earlier, also, this isn't the first time this has been a problem. Like, ground effects cars existed in the 70s or the 80s and 90s. So they are aware that this happens. I did think it was funny that like a few teams were like just straight up like cutting holes in their floors and stuff to like just DIY a fix on the track. But I don't think it's going to change to your question. It doesn't really change my opinion of Ferrari because they looked good, looked good in the corners. They looked fast on the straights. And even with their big porpoising problem that we saw that footage of in day 2, they still did the most laps. So like, obviously this isn't having an effect on reliability. And that's one of the main names of the game for F1 is like, is your car going to break in half at some point because of this? So they were highest on the lap count, and I still think they're going to be in the mix fighting for that championship.
I mean, I think too, like Leclerc and Sainz were both in like the top 5. I think on like 2 or 3 of the days, right? So, to me, it's like it's not even a question as like, is it an issue, right? Like the team that had the most significant porpoising was one of the fastest teams out there and did the most laps. So,
yep.
They'll figure it out. And if they can't for some weird reason, they'll cut holes in the floor.
No, maybe it's their version of the Deion Sanders high stepping as they.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about looking at the results from testing, right? Like to Todd's point, I don't want to see Mercedes and Red Bull in the top 4 spots. I want Lewis to win another title. I don't care if Mercedes wins another constructor title ever. I'm not like a crazy Mercedes fan, but I'm not like, it's not exciting to see the same team win as long as they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that it's really interesting that Sebastian Vettel was 5th, all 3. I think it was all 3 test sessions, which I just would not have expected that. If you would have just said blindly pick the top 10 drivers for each day, I don't think Sebastian Vettel would have been maybe an 8 or a 9 or a 10 for me on 1 or 2 days. But to see him consistently at 5 was like, whoa, what's going on over there?
Maybe the German, like Dirk, still has some fight in his game. What I was going to ask, because when you guys talked to me about testing, my mind simply went to the fact that, okay, everybody's just testing out the layout of the car. I never even thought about the component of the stress testing component of this, which is, hey, we're trying to just put in as many laps as we can because we do want to see the durability and the endurance of these cars. And that's crazy to me because when you look at the spreadsheets and you see some of these guys have gone upwards of 150 plus laps in single day sessions, like, this seems to be as important of a day. It's not preseason as we come to find out, and from an American sports perspective, which is, just don't get hurt and make sure the car gets through, because that's what my thought was. It's just like, put a fast time down and don't break the car. This is not that. In a way, you kind of want to break the car, or you at least kind of want to understand where your pain points are, because you do need to tighten it up for that season, which is, to Todd's point, only 3 weeks away.
Yeah, that's... First, going off of what Nick said, I literally didn't realize that Seb was 5th all 3 days. That's a bit surprising. I know like the times are almost nonsensical. Like we don't know how much fuel they had in the car. We don't know what their run plan was. We don't know exactly what they were testing out. Either setup or race plan or whatever. But like the times still matter on some level, like bragging rights if you want. And from my understanding, especially on day 3 when their car caught fire, like Aston didn't have a terrible test, but it wasn't great. They had issues with the porpoising, and I can't remember if it was them or Alpine or Alpha. It was definitely an A team that cut holes in their floor, but they had like some rough spots in their test, and they did like decent laps overall, but I wouldn't call it a great test. So to see Seb up there putting on some pace that's pretty awesome. And I would love nothing more than Sebastian all of a sudden to be fighting in maybe the top 6 every race. That would be amazing. Yeah. He just deserves it. He's an awesome person.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, this also makes me want to do that draft episode. We need to get somebody else on there, because I think a draft works great with 4 of us, because there's 20 drivers and we all get 5 to pick from, or we just reduce the number of drivers we all pick. But I would love to see where Sebastian kind of ends up in our collective driver power ranking, because I still think he's a top 10 driver. His car may not be there, but he's shown, at least in the 2 years that I've started watching the sport, that he can truly get the most out of his machinery. It doesn't matter if it's a Ferrari level with or without the powerful engine, or even almost an expansion team, if you will, or a reboot when it comes to Aston Martin. So, yeah, I think we're all big Sebastian Vettel fans here.
Yep. I think the other thing to point out, too, was that going back to the porpoising conversation, right? McLaren seemed to have a pretty, let's say, above average testing, right? But they had absolutely none, to the point where people were asking what the secret was. And this morning I read a thing that basically was like, them admitting that they had no idea what it was that prevented the porpoising, but they were like, they would love to say that they know exactly what it was, but it was really just kind of, it worked out that way. The car didn't have the issue. And, for the most part, at least that was one thing that went, 100% smooth for them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I read that same thing, that James Key was getting interviewed. He's the technical director of McLaren, for those that don't know. And after reading that, I'm a bit scared. I got to be honest. I'm glad you brought that up, because the porpoising thing can happen at any time, right? So if they make some sort of tweaks in other areas, that could affect their car in such a way that it creates that porpoising effect. And then they're starting weeks behind these other teams that, have been researching it this whole time. So I'm hoping that they're trying to find out their best damn way they can why their car isn't doing it, or why other cars were. Because like you mentioned, they had a pretty above average test, like Lando going fastest on P1. He even made a joke about it, like on Twitter. I think I saw, like, man, everybody's going to be all hyped, like way overhype us because I'm P1. I'm kind of mad about finishing P1 that day. Like, you got to love him because he's just like a goofy kid about it. But yeah, it's kind of scary that their test almost went too well. But even like Mercedes, which ended up day 3 on top, had like a decent amount of like the porpoising problem, and they were able to kind of tune it out of the car. But McLaren had almost none, and they, weren't the fastest. So a little scary.
So I guess $1 billion question for the both of you: has this recent round of testing inspired any new hot takes that you would like to add to our burgeoning collection from episodes past?
I mean, I feel pretty confident on my hot takes, but I'm going to just reiterate, like, I think Ferrari is going to be a force to be reckoned with this year. I think, it's going to be a really great year to watch Formula One. I don't think that Mercedes and Red Bull are going to be as dominant as they have been. And if you put Ferrari in there, and if this testing is not a fluke from McLaren, and Seb somehow is just consistently like nobody's paying attention, and he's in the middle of the pack at 5th on the grid, this is going to be an amazing year of racing. If all of those things are not like just flukes over the past few days.
I wish.
Todd, how about you?
Well, now that you bring it up, I kind of wish that we had like all saved our hot takes on like a shared document so I could secretly edit mine. Because one of my hot takes was that Bottas was gonna qualify on the podium at least twice. And if we're looking at the stats, again, the times don't mean everything. But not only did Alfa Romeo have probably one of the two worst test sessions, them and Haas, but Bottas was last. Like, out of every driver's fastest time over the course of the 3 days, the only person slower than Bottas was Robert Kubica, who was a reserve driver. So, not awesome. Not looking good for my hot take there, my prediction. But yeah, it's looking really rough for not only Alfa Romeo, but Haas at this point, which is, kind of a bummer.
Now, I was going to say, I've got the hot takes up because I, for some reason, had the foresight to put them on a sticky note. So my 3 teams will score 0 points is looking good. I just need Williams to screw the bed, but I don't know. Maybe Alex Albon will get them some points, so maybe only 2 teams will have no points this season. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I still can't make heads or tails of who's good or who's not, but maybe that's the whole point of this testing, is to make sure that if you have a good car, you want to make sure it's a good car, and if you have a great car, you want to downplay it a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a cat and mouse game, and I feel like all the teams don't want to show their full hand at unless they have to, right? So
Right.
there's just so many variables and so many things that are going to get tweaked and changed, and but that's also what makes it fun, right? Like, that's going to be the best part about the first few races of the year, right? It's going to be like a free for all. And then we're going to see like who's not just, got the luck of the draw.
And the best part about that is that, I mean, thinking back to last year, our boy Lando had like a pretty amazing start to the season. I think he had 3 P3s in the first 5 races or something like that.
He was keeping up. Yep.
Yeah. And then the development race kicked in, and we saw McLaren trail in the last half of the year after the summer break. So even if a team starts the year really bad, it doesn't mean they're going to end there. But I hope we're looking at exciting racing up and down the grid. I'd like to see a very intense battle for P3, and the same thing, a very intense battle for P18, because it's, whatever makes exciting racing makes exciting racing. I was listening to another podcast, and I heard Charles Leclerc talk about how, if the new regulations really got done what they were setting out to do, and that's closer racing. And he described it in a very interesting way. So he said from about 3 seconds behind a car to 1.5 seconds behind a car, it felt a lot better than before, because we talked about this a little bit, but following a car in front of you in an F1 car, you lose a lot of downforce. You can't go as fast as them. You chew up the tires faster, et cetera, et cetera. But he said between 3 seconds and 1.5 seconds, it was, generally better than it was following a car was before. And then from, I think it was 1.5 seconds to a half second, it was actually a fair amount worse, which you have to be within 1 second to use DRS to get that pass done generally in F1. So that was really interesting to hear that it felt worse to him. But then he said once he got within a half second to like extremely close behind, a couple of tenths, it was just heads and tails above, head and shoulders above better about getting, following at that closer range. So I have really no idea what to make out of this test. I'll be really excited to see what I can see with my own eyes, as opposed to getting it downloaded through a bunch of different journalists and fans and stuff, whoever was attending the first test. But yeah, I think I share Nick's optimism that we're looking at a really good year of F1.
Perfect. Now, I will say my next and last question, because we are running up around that hour mark that we like to end our episodes with. We are 2 weeks away, roughly, from Formula One's Drive to Survive Season 4. Do you think we get the trailer this week? Because I have never been more excited to view an upcoming season's trailer in terms of trying to figure out what's going to be the narrative and the tone of which that controversial ending that we reference at least once an episode is going to be like, because it is ultimately the official look at the season before.
I think we see it this week.
I have a feeling they're going to wait to drop it until the week before. I don't know why. But in news about that, apparently Zach Brown, the CEO of McLaren, leaked a little bit of details about Drive to Survive and did say that McLaren are the subject or focus of episode 2 and episode 7. So take that for what it's worth. I got really excited because, we got a couple of McLaren-centric episodes, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm hoping either next week we all do our each of our own 10 episodes season 4, what it looks like, or we do the draft.
Yeah. I think that'd be awesome. All right, well, what we got to do? We got to read the reviews next time. Forgot about that. But
we do need to do.
If you're enjoying the podcast, this is episode 10. So now that we're 10 episodes in, let us know what you think about it. Give us some feedback. Leave us a review, iTunes or Apple Podcasts, as it's called now. Pretty much anywhere, you can find us. Leave us some feedback. Make sure you're following us, Exhaust Notes FM on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, even though I haven't done anything on there yet. And then you can check out all the other episodes, exhaustnotes.fm. But that's pretty much it for me. Guys, let them know how they can connect with you outside of the podcast.
RoadM13 on IG and at Roheezy on Twitter.
That's at Teezy on Instagram and at HackJandy11 on Twitter. And I want to say shout out to Scott McLaughlin for the fantastic race today in IndyCar.
Very nice.
All right, you can find me at Nick Kingval on all the platforms. And you can catch us all in the Sneaker History Discord if you want to chat with us between episodes, between races, between Drive to Survive episodes. And we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Later.
Leave us a review.